were kind of challenging the conversation they had about God. Zach sent us a message via our Facebook page, and with some really good thoughts and some pushback, some challenges to some of the things that we said.
He didn't really like Jared's jokes.
I don't think that's true. We're going to hear from him in a second, but I think he loved my jokes. But he nevertheless didn't like some of the stuff we said and gave some good challenges. And then, I mean, he was bold enough and open enough, which is cool, to say, hey, if you guys ever want to talk. So we hit him up and we're like, you want to come on? And so here he is. Zach, welcome to the podcast, man.
Welcome, Zach.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks for having me.
Now, Zach, tell us a little bit about yourself. For those who are listening, you are from the Carolinas.
Yep, Columbia, South Carolina. The square on the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, right in the middle.
All right.
And yep, I was raised Christian, and until about 5 years ago. But from when I was baptized till about 5 years ago.
Now, cool. We were talking to you a little bit before, and I asked you if you would call yourself an atheist. So how would you classify yourself, Zach?
In all honesty, the way Ricky put it, I think is the most fair way to be an agnostic atheist. There's a lot of atheists who don't like the term agnostic, but I'll take it. I'll take that.
Yeah. Is that interesting, living in South Carolina, kind of in the Bible Belt, being an agnostic atheist?
Yeah, there's no one you can really talk to about it unless you find maybe Facebook groups and things like that, because the Baptist denomination is very prominent, and that's what most people are around here. But there's a lot of non-denominational churches. People really into God down here.
Anthony and I were joking that we're kind of opposites. We're right outside of New York City, Long Island, and yeah, if you lived here, you would be in the majority. You would be celebrated.
I got to take a visit one day then, see how it feels.
Yeah, there you go. We'll come down your way and see how that feels.
Very good.
Well, we're excited to chat with you today, and you sent us a pretty lengthy message with just a bunch of different stuff that you gave some pushback to. So what we want to do today is kind of hear some of those objections to what we said on the podcast, and then we'll respond and kind of have a little bit of a discussion. So we're interested. So Zach, take it away. What were some of your main critiques about things that we said, or some pushback about what was said on the last podcast?
To start out, when you said that, why is the most important question you can ask of anything, and I really think that when you said that, you didn't take into account that usually you need the how to get to the why.
Mm-hmm.
The questions answered, like, how did we get here? Well, then we can figure out through the scientific method how we got here, or if we can't, we keep pushing until we can find an answer. That kind of thing. What was the other ones? I'm trying to think. Got my notes.
We could start there.
Yeah, we'll start there and talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. Understanding how things work can give us insight into why they're there in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's an important point to make, but that doesn't work, in my opinion, in every circumstance. John Polkinghorne is a physicist from Cambridge, and when he's talking about this issue of whys and hows and the differences between theology and science, he gives an analogy of a tea kettle that's boiling, right? And he says, look, imagine there's this tea kettle, and we ask all of the physicists and all of the scientists to examine this tea kettle and tell us what's going on here. And he'll say, look, science tells us that burning gas heats the water and makes the kettle boil, right? But the thing is, that's only one side of the explanation. That's only one part of the explanation. There's also another explanation here, and that's I'm thirsty and I want some tea. I want something to drink. And that's not something that's accessible through the scientific method. Both of those explanations together, both the scientific and the subjective and the personal explanation, come together to give us a full one. So to say only looking at the how is automatically going to lead to the why isn't true in every case. Does that make sense?
I guess that's deeper philosophically than I know how to answer, because for me, when I look at it, why is the tea there? well, because I made it and I want to drink it. I'm thirsty. It tastes good. That's why it's there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think to Anthony's point, though, then the why would be a more pressing, a more important question. Not that the how isn't important, but you could answer all the hows, but never get to the why. You could study that thing like crazy, but never understand, well, it's there because I made it for my consumption. That's its purpose. And I think, like reading your comment, the pushback, I do believe that the why is the most important. And I think when you look at people, they all believe this, whether they admit it or not. And a good example is we can, when someone commits a crime, if you shoot somebody in the head, you can study how it's done. And I can give you a detailed analysis of, well, the bullet fired from the chamber at this rate of acceleration and then entered the brain cavity, and here's what happened, and here's how the life ceased in them. And I can give you all the detailed explanation. But what I can't tell you is why that person did it, which leads to things like justice. Are they innocent or are they guilty? There could be scenarios where the reason why they pulled the trigger was totally justified. And there could be reasons why it wasn't justified. And so our whole legal system, our whole justice system is based on those why questions. The how questions are important, granted, and maybe we didn't communicate that great on the podcast with Ricky. We're not saying they're not important, but what we're saying is to assume that nobody cares about the why questions, which I think is what Ricky Gervais was doing, and a lot of atheists do that. I think is not true to the human nature and what we see all around us. People do care about the why.
Well, sure, I totally agree with that. But I would say, in return, when you could ask the shooter why he did it, and he could give a reasoning for it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and that would be part of figuring out, was he justified or was he not? So what I'm saying is, if the how doesn't, like you made the statement, the how usually leads to the why. Well, not always. No, it doesn't.
Not always.
And so I think the why questions are the big questions, the ones that really matter, even more so than the how.
And that's not to say, okay, that science doesn't matter, or science is irrelevant, or science is somehow secondary, or doesn't answer difficult questions. Absolutely not. That's not what we were trying to convey. And if it came off like we were saying that, I apologize. We were just simply trying to say that there's a difference between mechanism and agency. Just because we could understand the mechanisms of our universe, how things work, that doesn't necessarily explain why they're there. And we just wanted to draw that distinction. We don't want to say that science doesn't matter at all.
No.
So,
yeah.
If that came across, we definitely didn't mean that.
No. It was just for me, in the way I think of it. Well, you can ask the big grandiose question of why is there something? Why are we here? And also the important, what's the point of me being here? Well, I think if you can figure out these things just starting from the bottom and working your way out, and to look out and beyond into the universe, let's see if there's a why at the end of that tunnel. I mean, and us being so young as a species. I mean, yesterday was it NASA found those 7 new planets?
Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah, that's
crazy, and that's kind of leads into that. Well, let's see how this works. How do these planets? How could they sustain life? It's that more the curiosity. I believe could eventually lead to the why.
Yeah, so we did a podcast, Zach, a while back, which we called, I think it's called our Atheist Intellectually Lazy, and we really dive into this, because one of my pushbacks against atheism is the total they're writing off of this question, why is there something rather than nothing? And Ricky Gervais kind of did it too. And what's interesting to me is, atheists tend to really cling to truth, and we want to dive in and get to the answers. We want to ask the tough questions, and often their criticism of religion, and to a large extent fair criticism of religion, is that it's mindless. It's just about faith. They don't really care about truth. But my critic of them is, when it comes to that big question, why is there something rather than nothing? They just go, well, it doesn't matter. So I'm like,
not all atheists, but
Not all.
some of the bigger ones, like Peter Atkins and Richard Dawkins, would say, you know what, it's not really important. It's Peter Atkins says it's a silly question, and I don't think it's a silly question. I don't think you do either.
No. Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think most atheists will either dismiss it or ignore it altogether, just due to the fact that it's something they can't answer. That right now I can't know the why, and that Christians or people of faith in general believe they have the why. Right? Yeah. So I think that's the biggest reason, in my opinion, that why the why is dismissed.
yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. So, what was another one of the critiques that you sent us?
We had the one where you had the example of an atheist and a theist saw a man that was limbless grow his limb back in front of us in the explanation of the two.
Yeah.
And so I said that the atheist would say, well, there's a reason behind that, we can figure it out, when the theist would say it was an act of God. And if the atheist could not prove rationally why this happened, then the theist could still say, see, it was an act of God. You can't prove it.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. What would convince you that something was a miracle? Is there anything that would convince you that there is such a thing as a miracle or some supernatural event?
Yeah. I mean, some of the things in Revelation, if they started coming true, I'd be like, well, this is it. I was wrong.
That's a good answer.
There's not a whole lot. It would take some probing into that miracle for me to find out if it was.
Yeah,
just
man. Yeah.
Me being the curious person, I'm gonna poke and prod it and test it and get people's other input on it. Let's see if it happens just in front of me, and say someone came down from heaven and it was an angel and it was right in front of me. One, I'd be like, am I tripping right now? Who did what to me? And if I didn't have anyone else to verify it, then no matter if I believed it or not, I'm going to sound crazy, and there's still going to be people in the world going, Zach, you must have been going crazy. You were seeing things.
You sound like me, because whenever Jared and me discuss miracles, I'm usually very, very skeptical. Jared thinks everything's a miracle.
Oh, here we go.
He thinks, if he prays for his headache to go away and it goes away, all of a sudden,
Listen, when I find a parking space at the mall on Christmas, you can tell me that's not a miracle? I mean, come on.
I don't think it's a miracle.
That's supernatural. You've been to the mall. It's crazy. No, I'm just kidding.
I get that. In middle school, I always prayed to God, I don't want to see on my report card my mom and dad will kill me. Yeah. Hey, look at me.
Yeah. Well, that prayer never worked for me. I still got the C's.
So I'm naturally very, very, very skeptical. So for me, it's very difficult when someone says something miraculous happened to me. I'm usually the first person to think of all of the naturalistic explanations that could account for what happened. So I'm the first one to say that. So for me, I would have to rule out all the naturalistic explanations. Is there a plausible naturalistic explanation for what's going on here? And if there isn't one, I can't rule out the possibility of something supernatural, because then I'm presupposing a priori that the supernatural is not real. And this is something that I find a little bit problematic with Christopher Hitchens, who says, it would be more likely that I hallucinate than the laws of nature be broken in my favor. Well, so then what evidence could I possibly give you? And what would actually convince you that God exists? It seems like you're setting up the goalposts in a way that no one actually could score. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Jesus himself could come down and show up in your room and say, hey, you'd have that Saul to Paul conversion. Hey, it's me. I'm real, and based on that worldview or that mentality, it would go, no, I probably hallucinated that, or I dreamed that. So when you made that comment, and you hear this from atheists a lot, the problem with that mentality is you are basing it on a presupposition that there is no God. So you're already enclosing yourself into a worldview that only allows for a naturalistic explanation, which means doesn't matter what type of supernatural thing could happen, you would never be open to it, even if you couldn't discover a natural explanation. To your point, well, we'll just wait and maybe we'll find one day. And I think that's problematic.
Go ahead.
I wouldn't say that in with that way of thinking that I suppose that there is no God. I don't believe it because the proof is not in front of me. I'm not, and I wouldn't be the one to jump to the conclusion that it was a miracle as well as some people would. But just like we just said, I would have to have that overwhelming evidence that this was a miracle, and this cannot be explained at all.
Right. Yeah.
So let me ask you though, if someone in front of you had their limb cut off, someone came over and prayed over it, and it grew back immediately, what would your response be to that?
I would be skeptical too, Zach. So I mean, I would say I'm not sure. Like I'd be right there with you.
I would be like, would you two mind coming with us, and we're gonna find someone who can do a genetic experiment and make sure you're not one of the X-Men. Do you know Professor Xavier? Come on, let's check this out.
Now that's a good point, Zach. We forgot to say maybe that person's a mutant.
A mutant, yeah. You would if the person be willing, you would sit there and be like, can we test? Just like there was the movie with John Travolta where that he could Phenomena, I believe it was, where he saw the light and he could do all these crazy things, and they wanted to do the test on him and stuff. It would be like that kind of thing. Can we check this out? Can we verify anything?
Yeah, the problem, though, with the scientific method and something that's supernatural is in order to test something, it has to be repeatable. And the very nature of a supernatural event means it's not repeatable, right?
Exactly.
So something like that, you couldn't. There would be no test. You go and look at the arm and go, okay, yeah, it's a perfectly functioning arm now. But how do we test? I mean, unless you continue to cut the person's arm off and it keeps growing back, then I guess at that point maybe they are a mutant. But that's also the very nature of something being supernatural is that it's not a repeatable, testable thing that you can submit to the scientific method. So I actually think you got to start with a bigger question, which is which worldview makes sense. And I don't think it serves people well to presuppose that there is no potential for the laws of nature to be violated, because I think that boxes us in.
Yeah, and that's the hard part is that miracles, they can't, just like you said, they can't be testable, but if someone performed said miracle, you could test them. And like when Jesus comes back, if he comes back, you could test him. I know I couldn't think of a specific verse in the Bible. I know Jesus was tempted by Satan in the desert to do certain things, and all he was trying to do is imply his scientific method, and he wouldn't have none of it. But you can't test miracles, and you're right. And but someone who performs a miracle, I believe you could test it.
Yeah, let me ask you: have you done any research or reading into the resurrection and the historicity of the resurrection and the evidence for the resurrection?
Yeah, I actually, you guys probably think this is kind of funny and or ironic. When I was out of high school, I wanted to become a youth minister, and I very seriously debated going to seminary school to do so. I was heavily involved in church. I've read the Bible about twice, and one time half-heartedly. I can't remember everything, but yeah, I'm familiar with the resurrection and Jesus coming back to many different people and stuff like that.
So the reason I ask is because we're talking about miracles and miracles being able to be proven or tested, and I think obviously all of the Christian faith is based on the resurrection, and it's also the uniqueness of Christianity over every other religion, right? Every other religion and worldview or form of spirituality is somebody saying, I'm going to point you to the way, do what I say. God came and told me this. Now I'll show you how to get to God. Where Christianity is unique that God came down to us. He came and got us. It's also unique in the fact that Jesus resurrected and ascended into heaven. So the interesting thing is, as you study the resurrection, there is, and this is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, there is so much evidence for the historicity that this actually happened, and there's so much proof, and there's so many guys like Gary Habermas, who you read his story, and these guys who are atheists, non-believers, and they start studying it, and they actually put their faith in Christ because they're overwhelmed by the resurrection, that this event actually did happen. Like, there's no other historical explanation for how Christianity grew the way it did and all these different factors unless this really happened. So I think if we could prove a miracle, to me, the beauty of Christianity is the resurrection, which is the most important miracle of all, actually has a lot of credibility. Now, sure, we can't prove it 100%, but I think it has a lot of weight to it.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't Muslim is the most popular religion in the world with like 1.5 billion people?
It's the second most popular religion. Christianity is the first with, I think it's 2.5 billion. I could be wrong. Okay. I think Muslim has 1.5.
I think it's Islam is the fastest growing, though. Yeah. I do believe.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's, and I completely admit my arrogance when it comes to knowing everything about the Muslim religion, but I'm fairly certain that they wholeheartedly believe that things happened regarding Muhammad, and
right.
Or that's why they're so dedicated to the things they want to do. And when it comes to, you say that proof that Jesus was resurrected, there's proof in literature through the Bible that he was resurrected, but I hesitate to call it evidence.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing to respond to the Muhammad thing, Muhammad is completely different than Jesus in a lot of ways. What makes Christianity unique is it's falsifiable. So it's the only religion or spiritual view that you could prove to not to be false. If you could prove the resurrection didn't happen, you could prove it. You can't do that with any other religion, and Islam is the same, because you're basing your faith on the words of Muhammad, who said, God revealed this to me, I'm the prophet, and now I'm going to tell you how to get to God, so put your faith in me. That's completely subjective, right? I can't objectively go up to Muhammad and go, no, you're wrong. You know, it's like you grew up in church, so you had this experience with crazy Sister Betty Christian who comes up and goes, God told me that you're going to be a lion tamer in the circus or something, something crazy. And it's like, well, if you use the God told me card, how do I argue with you?
I don't
know. I can tell you no, but and so it's not falsifiable. I can either put my faith in his words or I can't. But Christianity isn't the same. Where Jesus actually came to earth and he said he was God, but he didn't just say it. He then did what he said he was going to do by living, dying, and resurrecting from the dead. And so I think if you could prove that didn't happen, and it's very easily to prove that. If they had found the body, it would have been proven a whole bunch of different ways, but it wasn't, and it hasn't, and it won't. And so to the other point, do you want to talk a little bit about...
What was the other point?
What was your second point? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say something there too. In general, you're also taking someone's word that Jesus was the Son of God, that he died and came back.
Go ahead.
Jesus isn't coming to you and me right now, flesh and blood, and saying, "Here's the holes in my hand. Come check it out." So you are taking someone's word. You are correct in the fact that you don't find a body. I know that there was at one point they believed they found the family grave, and where they thought maybe Jesus's remains have been there with Mary's and Joseph all in this tomb, a family type tomb. But you're right, like 2,000 years is hard to find a body. You don't know if somebody took it somewhere or anything, or like you said, he did rise. His body ascended into heaven. But I agree with you on that point, but I also say you're also taking someone's word for it because you can't see it yourself.
Yeah, I hear you. Although I think there's a major difference between like what Muhammad did, where it's one man writing down, here's what God told me in a vision or a dream, or Joseph Smith doing the same thing. There's a huge difference between that and then what we have in the New Testament. We put our faith in a collection of evidence. It's a collection of authors. It's a collection of historians, even non-Christian historians, guys like Josephus who are writing about things that validate. We're seeing archaeology, which validates truth. Even a guy like Gary Habermas who says, listen, let's assume Scripture is not supernaturally inspired by God, and he just takes it as historical documents. He has what's called the minimal facts argument, where he looks at these minimal facts that we know historically to be true, and the evidence overwhelmingly points to the resurrection actually happened. And if you read or listen to Gary Habermas, he was an atheist who begins to study this and became a Christian. You can't do that same thing with Muhammad and his vision about who God is. And that's uniquely Christian, that it's falsifiable. With any other of these guys, Muhammad, Joseph Smith, any form of spirituality, it's somebody who gets inspired, somebody who gets a dream or a vision from God, and there's no way to test it. There's no way to falsify it. Christianity is unique in its falsifiability. And when you take the collection of evidence, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to go, Jesus actually lived, he actually died, and he actually rose again. And if that's true, he's worth putting my faith and trust in.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can draw that conclusion if you choose to believe it. But there also during that time there were people who, if you spoke about Jesus, you were going to get beat up and shunned, just like John on the island of Patmos. I mean, before he even got there, he was burned with oil and all that. And you would think maybe, hey, I'm either going to keep my mouth shut, but when it blows over, I'm letting it out, or that kind of thing. So the story could have been distorted. There's just so many variables within 2,000 years that could have happened. And I know you're talking about a couple years after Christ even died, someone who saw it and said that they saw it, that kind of thing. But I still, it's like the telephone game until it was like verifiably written down as it was. And then, of course, you have the Romans kind of take it over at some point and make their own additions to the Bible. Then you have all these different kind of variables. It's just changing. So you really don't, for me personally, I don't know I don't know how reasonably, as a reasonable man, that I could follow it and say, yeah, this is 100% correct.
I mean, that's a good point. But for me, I think there's good reasons why we could trust the historicity and the reliability of the New Testament. Like I said, I'm pretty skeptical, but the thing is that the vast majority of scholars date the New Testament itself to the first century, and these are not just Christians. These are atheists, people like Bart Ehrman and Gerd Ludemann, John Dominic Crossan, who are all non-believers. They're not Christians. They're all atheists or agnostics. So to say that the New Testament was written hundreds and hundreds of years later doesn't actually go in line with what the vast majority of critical scholars are actually saying about the New Testament. I mean, to put this in perspective, Plutarch wrote his biography of Alexander the Great 400 years after the death of Alexander the Great. According to critical scholars, the New Testament was not written 400 years after the death of Jesus. It was written 20 to 30 years after the death of Jesus. So I think we have to think critically about this. I think there's good reasons for us to trust the reliability of the New Testament. People who are writing on this, I would encourage you to check out N.T. Wright. There's a book, very scholarly, called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses by Richard Balcom, who's a very prominent scholar in the field of New Testament criticism. I think there's good reasons to trust in the reliability and the historicity of the New Testament.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and it's still even after that time. Think of all the years after that, during that first century, where it was gone over, and due to political standings, the Bible was revised to reflect things that the sovereignty of the government would want you to believe, would want their people to believe.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any evidence for that. If there is, I'd like to see it.
Well, with like the discovery of things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, we have early documents. That's where these dating of these documents come from. So, and there's so many copies of manuscripts. Compared to other historical documents, it's not even close. And so when you have that level of that level of number of manuscripts, you can compare them all and go, is there changes in here? Is there discrepancies in here?
But not even the later manuscripts. There's one specific manuscript that is really interesting. Zach, if you want to look this up later, it's called the P52 Papyrus. And the P52 Papyrus is a tiny fragment of John's Gospel. Okay, and most scholars date this specific fragment to the end of the first century. So we actually have a piece of John's Gospel that goes all the way back to around 90 A.D. So to say that later the New Testament was changed and there's political influences is not necessarily the case when we have such early papyrus that shows that no, in fact, the New Testament was written way earlier. But anyway, that's something you could look up afterwards and just to see.
Oh, for sure. I definitely will. But wouldn't you say that there would be a difference of the Bible pre-King James and prior to King James?
Yeah, well, now you're talking about translations. So the King.
Well, yeah, and things get lost in translation.
Yeah, the King James is a translation, but we don't even need to look to the King James. I mean, most biblical scholars now know that the King James is a pretty poor translation, and so there are. I mean, you're kind of in Baptist land there, so I believe that there's quite a few Baptists who are kind of King James only type of people, And as a pastor myself, I think that's a mistake because I think it's a pretty poor translation for some of the reasons that you're saying. But we have documents that are way earlier. Like, we don't rely on the King James version. So modern translations like the NIV, the ESV, and even others are not based out of the King James. They're based out of the original documents that we have. And so I think. Are there translations? Yes, and we got to do a good job of like looking through those translations and saying which ones of these do a good job and which ones don't. But that's not the same as the actual early documents and what they say. What they say, yeah.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you. All right.
Sure.
How do you make sense? Because really, to me, this whole stuff is a question of worldview. We can't conclusively prove God exists. You can't conclusively prove God doesn't exist. So I think one thing that's important that we do is look at our worldview and say which worldview makes the most sense with what we believe to be true, how we live, how we practice. And so in your worldview, do you believe in things like objective morality? Do you believe in things like human value? What are your thoughts on those things?
I was waiting for the objective morality to come up.
I was waiting.
So, objective morality is that something in the universe makes these fundamental truths. I would say that yes, I believe in objective morality. That it's more of along the lines of the evolution that you gain these morals through life as your ancestors did, and even as infants, there's things that make infants cry, such as things that just don't make them feel good. I mean, even animals kind of show things like empathy and stuff. Like if one of the animal dies and they grew up together and one dies, I've seen a dog cry over its dead sibling, like that kind of thing.
Wow.
I think that it is an innate, ingrained even into the DNA, that it's something like almost like defense mechanism to a degree.
Yeah. So do you think if we evolved to think that rape was okay, that everyone would just think that it was okay? Or is our morals just contingent upon our evolutionary past?
If rape was...
If we evolved to think that rape was okay, would that mean that all of us would just go along with it? Would it be okay?
I think if we started evolving, the only way that rape would be okay is if rape was necessary to the survival of your species. If we started out and things were working, and that's how our ancestors had to do it to reproduce, then rape would be all right. But luckily, that's not the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but you could understand that people who hear that from our side find it a little bit difficult to swallow. Evolution could tell us how the world is. It could tell us, look, you evolved to feel this morally. This is why you feel this way. This is why you feel empathy. This is why you feel compassion. But that doesn't tell us that we ought to treat people with compassion, that we ought to treat people right. It just tells us how the world is. But science doesn't tell us how the world ought to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. One thing that I've recently heard brought up and is new to me is the veil of ignorance. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
So the gist of it is you're going to tell somebody, you're going to put the veil over them that a rape is going to happen, but you don't know if you're being raped or you're the rapist.
And of course you're going to say, no, I don't want that to happen.
I don't want to be raped.
Yeah.
And I think that still goes back to I think that's a judgment call everyone personally makes.
Right.
And some people, due to maybe mental disorders, don't have that function in their head, because most of the time you would say, I don't want to shoot somebody because I don't want to get shot,
right?
Or I don't want to be stabbed. Like, I don't do unto others as I would have them do unto me. I think that is a common trunk of the tree that branches out with the rest of the morals.
Yeah,
really.
Empathy is really a lot of times where the naturalist has to go, and I understand that.
But I find this interesting because I hear this argument, but I look at our world and I don't see that to be the case. I mean, why does everybody lock their doors at night? Why do we have... I don't see the majority of the world practicing this do unto others as you would do to yourself. I think most of us don't ever live up to our own moral standard. What we think other people should do to us, we oftentimes don't do to them.
Well, the veil of ignorance is saying, well, what if it was you? Someone is going to get hurt. What if it was you or the other person? You don't know who it is. You know what I'm saying? So obviously you're going to pick the one that causes you the less harm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is that obvious? I mean, I think there's a lot of people throughout history who wouldn't.
Are you sure? I mean, that seems like a pretty drastic statement, Jared.
I think there's plenty of people who have self-sacrifice, but either way, I mean, I still don't like. I'm not really sure how you can say I believe in objective morality, but then say, but the morality is hinged on our evolutionary process, because that by definition would mean it's not objective, it's subjective to what helps our survival or what is predominantly believed in culture.
Yeah, the is-ought distinction is really hard for me to swallow, even when I'm listening to ethicists like Sam Harris talk about it. You know, evolution tells us how the world is. Science tells us how the world is, okay? But that doesn't mean that's how we ought to behave. If I have a predisposition to a certain moral action, that doesn't mean I have to follow that moral action. We could deliberate, we could think about this, and we could choose to go along with what our instincts tell us what we might want to do and choose something else. So just because I have a predisposition because of my evolutionary past doesn't mean that's how I ought to behave.
Yeah, and if you break it down, the reason people will lock their doors at night, because there are those people who, for them, if you want to put it in the survival of the fittest type way, the only way they're going to get what they want is to come break into your house and steal it for them to prosper. That's kind of another branch of just right here, right now, what's going on in their brain. This is how they can survive. This is how they can get what they want.
Yeah, but certainly you could construct many arguments where it would be reasonable to say, you know what, to better human survival, we should kill off anyone who's mentally challenged, anyone who's elderly, anybody who can't contribute to society in a way that's going to benefit. You know, we've got overpopulation, overcrowding. Let's.
Jared, you might be on that list.
I may.
He has a lazy eye.
I may be. That's a true story, folks.
Well, there's people out there who definitely want that, like the Georgia Guidestones. They're are pretty strange thing to have, where it talks about we need to decrease the size of the population, and however which way people believe the morals get into people. Most people believe that's not right to go around just killing people because we need a stable population.
Yeah, but I think that's my problem with some of the stuff that you're saying, and even some of the other populists. Sam Harris talks about this all the time. Like, he presupposes that we should all value, the good of humanity, or the
human flourishing. He
always talks about that. And my critique is, well, why is that a presupposition? And even if that is a presupposition, I can think of a lot of arguments to do some pretty heinous things in order to accomplish human flourishing. I mean, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis are a great example of that. They honestly thought they were accomplishing human flourishing. They were killing off weaker species that were going to be a detriment to the flourishing of humanity.
Well, to be fair, Sam would say, and most atheists would say, if you're going to use that line of reasoning, the Hitler and World War II analogy doesn't actually work because they're not actually being logical. They're not actually being reasonable. If you thought about this logically and reasonably, this is not the best way to bring about a moral and just society.
But that's a subjective opinion. That's a subjective opinion.
You could say that. But I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Well, and see, and if you look at it, it was Hitler spread that idea that the Jews were bad,
right?
This Uber race that needs to Aryan race that needs to be flourishing on the earth because they're the best. It was installed in his lower,
right?
I guess we would call them minions ranking, and they went along with it because they were told to do it. And I even quoted the Stanley Milgram experiment.
Right. Yeah.
Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
But see, and when they were told to do these things, they
just did
they
it.
were believing that he was right, and so we're going to do it. But when it's all said and done, they got caught. I can't believe I did this.
I can't believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, this kind of thing.
And even
so that's all like a mental. That's all really psychological.
Yeah, you even see that with the Nuremberg trials too. But again, the defense for the war criminals, the defense for the Nazis was, look, this was my orders. This is what I was commanded to do. But the question is there a law that's higher than what your generals tell you to do? Is there a law that's higher than what your government tells you to do? Is there a moral standard that is beyond a subjective order that you get from your general? And it seems to me, on an atheistic framework, there are no objective moral standards.
I think fear probably overrode there.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, you could say I'd rather be pushing the button than being in there and having the button pushed on me.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think fear can make people do very strange things.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, again, it comes back to in worldview. In an atheist worldview, there is no foundation to say that what that person did was objectively wrong. You just can't. I mean, you could say, well, I think it's wrong. You can say the majority of culture says it's wrong. But I think ultimately, if you're an intellectually consistent atheist, you got to land where Bertrand Russell lands to say, I don't like it, but I can't say what they did was wrong because there is no grounding for objective morality.
Yeah, and I guess I hear what you're saying, and I don't have a good explanation for you, and I wish I did.
It's not an easy thing to answer. I mean, that's why most people who hold to your position would just say, yeah, you know what, whatever. It is subjective, and and that's how we have to live. But that's going to be a debate and a dialogue for the next 1,000 years to come. So.
Yeah, until the world ends, this one will be going on.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Yeah, for me, that's if anyone listens to the podcast, they'll know that that's really one of the strongest foundations, I think, for my belief in God. And whenever I'm filled with doubts, is I think objective morality is a great pointer to the fact that there is a God. There is someone who is above us, who has set a standard, and all of us believe that. Even if we say we don't believe it, we still live like we do, which I think is pretty interesting. So, Zach, I know you got to head out pretty soon, but any kind of last thoughts or comments or critiques from the last podcast?
Not really. I just, especially after I had listened to that one, like I said, I went back and listened to some of your other ones, and guys, there's a lot we can agree on. I really like how you guys embrace, and you don't find, especially down here, you do not find people who are willing to even say that evolution is real and it is a tool of God. That God set that in motion, and I think that's a really awesome way to look at things.
Well, I appreciate that.
Down here, it's just people saying, "I'm no monkey. I didn't come from no monkey." It's like, yeah, man.
Well,
I get it.
It just shows they don't understand evolution for the first part
at all.
You know what? It is interesting. It is something that we like to talk about because we take science seriously, and we take what the scientific method unveils to us very, very seriously. So. I appreciate that, man, and even today, like with the people that we interact with, this is kind of like a battle that you have to fight because a lot of people just grow up thinking one way, but to be fair, there are a lot of Christians, a lot of prominent theologians who agree with the theistic evolution position. So.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to say that I think a lot of Christians and people in general, I think you're selling yourself short if you do not ask these questions.
Oh, yeah.
If you just feel it makes you uncomfortable and you don't want to question it and you're just going to stick with what you believe, I think you're really cheating yourself.
Amen.
Absolutely, man. And
totally.
I mean, Anthony and I have a similar story to you. We both grew up in the church, and I'm 30. I'll be 32. And so I grew up in a very anti-intellectual church culture. That was kind of the time, and I grew up also in a Pentecostal church. I'm still part of Pentecostal church, but one of the potential downfalls for Pentecostal churches is they disengage their minds and think it's all about feelings and emotions and experiences. And so the reason we launched this podcast was actually out of that desire. As I'm a young adult pastor, and Anthony works with young adults too, and we just come across so many young adults who were either raised Christian but fearful to engage tough questions, or people who are not Christians who assume they could never be Christians because they believe in things like evolution or whatever, and they just didn't understand Christianity or thought there's no good reason to believe in this because if I'm a Christian, that means I disengage my mind. And so that's why we did this podcast. That's why we called it Young Minds, Big Questions, because we wanted people to have young, pliable minds and be willing to ask the big questions. And so it's cool to have somebody on like you. It's been a great
Zach,
conversation.
Thank you so much for calling, man. This was an awesome conversation, dude. Thank you.
No, thank you guys. I can't wait to maybe come back on and we can talk about some more stuff.
Without a doubt, dude. If you have any other critiques or questions, just call us and text us, and we'll totally have you back on, dude. Without a doubt, this was awesome.
For sure, guys. I can't wait to talk to you again.
Awesome, man.
Thanks, Zach, so
Thank
much.
you so
Have a good
much,
one.
dude.
You too. Bye.
All right.